From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Chris. And don't forget that Captain Kenny used to have a mullet. He even showed the photographic proof. Could he bring it back in here to the man cave? And I'll make sure that we put it up behind us. This is a constant reminder about the haircut of the gods. Now, we all know that the Prime Minister is cranky. He is cranky with his fellow Australians because they have denied him his place in Wikipedia history. Remember, most prime ministerships can generally come down to a description of the one thing they did. The GST, the apology, same-sex marriage, these are just the most recent ones. And of course, on Saturday night, as the Prime Minister was seething at 60% of the country voting against what 60% of the country supported just a few months ago, well, it was everyone but him.
We were not able to reach you and cut through what has been the single largest misinformation campaign that this country has ever seen.
But we have seen a disgusting no campaign, a campaign that has been dishonest, that has lied to the Australian people.
One of the things that's crystal clear from the campaign itself is Peter Dutton is a master of misinformation, and it was a Trumpian campaign of misinformation.
Why do you think Australians voted no?
The truth is that no referendum has succeeded without bipartisan support in this country. None.
Mr Dutton decided that he could, do better politically if he didn't give this bipartisan support.
We've had, including in outlets represented in this room, discussions about a whole range of things that were nothing to do with what was on the ballot paper tonight.
Blah, 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 blah. Remember, every state government bar Tasmania in the country is Labor. Almost every part of the media did their part for the cause. Most, if not all, of the big CEOs, the companies, the sporting organisations, let alone the money that was flowing in, the endorsements are plenty. The reality was that Australians, the more they learnt about the idea, they didn't like it. And the joy of democracy means that's exactly the case. Now, as always with Albo, it takes them a while to do what is eventually right. Now, remember, it was on Monday of last week when the Jewish community needed him to show support that he, of course, was campaigning at Uluru. It was only later in the week that he decided to turn up at synagogues. Well, Monday, multiple days after, history denied him the easy thing to remember about the Prime Ministership that is Anthony Albanese, a voice to Parliament, recognition in the Constitution. He found a way at about 3 o'clock this afternoon to say, yeah, OK, I take some responsibility here.
As Prime Minister, I will always accept responsibility for the decisions I've taken, and I do so tonight. But I do want Australians to know that I will always be ambitious for our country, ambitious for us to be the very best version of ourselves.
That was his version on Saturday night. Well, today he cleaned it up a little, made it a little clearer about taking responsibility. But there is an answer that the Prime Minister gave us today that actually gives us an insight into what he really thinks about what happened on Saturday night, about the contempt that he has for what happened on Saturday night. This was the question that he was asked very directly today in question time.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister committed to Makarrata truth-telling and treaty?
But have a listen to his answer. Now, two words might actually stand out to you because they did to me. So pay attention to every word he says about 60% of the country that ended up voting no in every state.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. What I'm committed to post the referendum is respecting what Indigenous people have said. And what they have said is that they are undertaking a week, which is reasonable for them to deal with what for many people, regardless of what way people voted in this referendum. I think it would be acknowledged that for many people, such as the women who I sat with, the Anungu leadership, who I sat in the red dirt of Uluru with last week, it will be a difficult time for them. And I think that should be respected.
Yeah, I heard it too. Let's just try to take the rest of the words out and just pay attention to what he says was the group who clearly voted differently than what Indigenous leaders, well, a big chunk of them, of course, Jacinta, Warren and plenty of others said no. But again, what group did he think voted no?
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. What I'm committed to post the referendum is respecting what Indigenous people have said. And what they have said is that they are undertaking a week, which is reasonable for them to deal with what for many people, regardless of what white people voted in this referendum.
Regardless of what white people voted? Now, I know the Prime Minister sits in his yes bubble of the inner west of Sydney, and I know that the Teal seats, of which most of the corporate support or the media support came from, voted yes. I know that the Greens seats voted yes. But the idea that the result of 60-40 no is because white people voted against it, of course, is a complete blind spot to what the Prime Minister is really thinking, what his subconscious thinks about what went wrong on the weekend. Now, in his home state of New South Wales, some of the seats that voted no are some of the most ethnically diverse in the entire country, like the seat of Fowler. One of the areas in it is Cabramatta, famous for its multiculturalism, with huge numbers of Vietnamese and Chinese voters. In fact, it is a minority of people in that electorate that would be described so dismissively as white people. Fowler voted 60% no, regardless of how white people voted. Seriously? What about an area in Bass Hill, again in southwest Sydney? Again, beautiful, ethnically diverse place which represents immigration and a whole bunch of other things, including the ethnic diversity that is Australia. 62% of them in the federal seat of Blaxland voted no. Yet what's the Prime Minister saying? Oh, it's all about white people voting no. But perhaps the biggest rejection of all of the seats, all of the data, the single biggest rejection of the Prime Minister's way of playing politics and the arrogance with which he refused to negotiate on the questions, the timing. He thought that this was all about a wedge issue for the Liberal Party going into the next federal election. Instead, it becomes a problem for him in reality now. What about the place called Hurstville? Again, in Sydney, not too far from where the Prime Minister is in Marrickville, in overall terms, but again, a deeply ethnically diverse place. A place that Linda Burney is the local MP, and she was able to win that seat on primary votes. More than 50% of the electorate voted for Linda Burney to be their local MP. But guess what Barton did? 56% voted no. So the Prime Minister, when he's having a little conversation with himself and letting the id come out, that he thinks that it's all about evil white people, the reality is that people of many an extraction, with the shortest and longest connections to the country, they voted no. Remember, the entire Northern Territory voted no in their 2 seats. Now, obviously, there was a yes vote there, but in terms of the majority, that's what happened in the Northern Territory. But can we play the grab of the Prime Minister again? Again, when he's coming up with what to say here because he doesn't want to ever give an answer, and this is what happened in Question Up today. He never gave answers to what the Liberal questions were. Instead, when it came to the referendum, there was one question from a Northern Territory MP, the Lingiari MP, representing an electorate of Alice Springs, that voted no, that he gave the grabs that you saw on the 6 p.m. news. Again, just imagine any other politician with what I'm sure will be called a slip of the tongue, or dare I say a slipping of the mask when it comes to Albanese and who he thinks robbed him of a place in history.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. What I'm committed to post the referendum is respecting what Indigenous people have said. And what they have said is that they are undertaking a week, which is reasonable for them to to deal with what for many people, regardless of what way people voted in this referendum.
Seriously, some of the most ethnically diverse places in the country saw it, didn't like it, and he was the one who took 60, turned it into 40. Ridiculous. Now, another thing that we've got to talk about here is this whole thing cost $450 million. And I've heard this referred to as a right-wing talking point. Well, let me quote the right-wing news agency, the ABC, who today said that the AEC estimated the cost of referendum about $450 million. So the AEC says it's about $450 million. $450 million. Well, of course, this is an extraordinary amount of money that has been wasted on a Prime Minister trying to bully his way through to the history books. Now, he'll dress it up in tears and the red dirt of the Northern Territory. Well, you know what this was all about. Now, he had plenty of times to split the question, to change the wording, to delay the vote. But no, he thought he had it sewn up because he was told by everyone in Marrickville, he was told by everyone in Barton, he was told by everyone in the ACT, good on you, Albo, you keep going, mate. Every time he walked into a interview and the questions were about the No campaign, he thought he nailed it when he didn't answer the actual questions. And every time he got a soft one on the ABC, well, again, that's just playing a home game, isn't it? Well, the Prime Minister, again, was asked a very direct question about this huge amount of money. Now, I do love the number of people who say, oh, let's just step past it. $450 million, $500 million.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, your government has spent $450 million on a failed referendum, while the Yiparinya School in Alice Springs has been asking for just $12 million to provide accommodation for at-risk Indigenous children to help close the gap. Will the Prime Minister commit to this funding?
Seriously? Honestly? Now, again, $450 million, and this was all about practical help in changing the thing. He made a choice. The polls told him for months. He could have put it off. He could have delayed it. He could have split the question so at least one half of it would have got up. But no, he wanted the history books. Well, this was the Prime Minister not answering a very direct question about an example of priorities, not to fund the schools, but to fund the vote that made the Teals, the Greens and the CEOs happy.
I thank the Leader of the National Party for his question. And I do note from the Leader of the Opposition that he's spoken about it being a waste to have a referendum. And there's a reason why the National Party perhaps have asked that rather than the Liberal Party, because the Leader of the Opposition committed during the recent referendum to hold another one. That's what he said. He stood up on multiple occasions, on the 11th of August, on the 3rd of September, on the 18th of September, and said his plan, put out there for all to see, was he wanted people to vote no in this referendum, then to have an election in which he was successful, and then to vote yes in another referendum.
OK, so it's all about Peter Dutton. Remember, I told you this would be one of their big strategies to change the subject, make it all about Peter Dutton. A long analysis of the vote, why it happened, all the rest of it's up on YouTube. It's up on our socials as well, but there's a little more in all of this. $450 million was spent on an idea that, now defeated, of course, results in nothing. $450 million could well have been spent, the exact same $450 million, on an awful lot of things that would have changed practical results all over the country. But of course that doesn't help you when you're playing for the history books. That doesn't help when you're looking for the biography. It doesn't help for your Wikipedia entry. And how do we know that $450 million could be spent better than on what just happened? Well, let's just go to the Indigenous Affairs Minister, Linda Burney, who's of course been very quiet, despite the fact that she stood there and said that everyone was full of misinformation and Trumpian and all the rest of it. Now, when the budget came out earlier this year, they were trumpeting some of the things that they were spending money on to invest in a better future for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Now, I want you to look at this first one here. They are going to spend $424 million on a whole-of-government investment into strategic priorities for closing the gap in the next 12 to 18 months. That could have been $900 million. But they needed $450 million so they could all have a big gold star on their jacket, so they could all end up with Chairman's Club forever and OAMs because they changed the country. Instead, $450 million spent on a referendum that every poll since June told us was going to fail. The date was not set. In June, there was an opportunity to split the question, but of course they didn't. Now, think $450 million of what has just been spent, and these are some of the things that money will get you in actually helping Indigenous communities. Again, this is from their own announcement. They spent $450 million on a referendum. They're spending $141 million on tackling Indigenous smoking. They're spending $238 million on improving First Nations cancer outcomes. They spent $450 million on a referendum. They could have doubled all of those things. $28 million for 30 dialysis units, $38 million for high-quality, culturally appropriate education. What about $20 million over 2 years to arrest the decline of the Aboriginal Hostels Limited? They could have doubled it. They could have spent 10 times. I don't know, but Albo needed his place in history. $11 million for food security. They could have spent how many more than that? Instead, no, $450 million, so they all feel good about themselves when they go to the next Labor Party conference. Fair dinkum. But perhaps the biggest spit in the eye of the priorities of this government is, remember when Anthony Albanese flew in and flew out in January of this year to Alice Springs, when the polls were still saying that the Voice was popular. But the priorities were clear. Remember, he flew in, flew out, spent more time flying to than actually in Alice Springs when it was in the middle of its problems earlier in the year. And then a couple of weeks later, they turned around and announced $48 million over the next 2 years. So really, what, the best part of $20-something million a year to help tackle crime in Alice Springs. Literally. They spent 10 times more money on a referendum they knew was failing than being able to do something to help the people of Alice Springs. It's called priorities, and while he's going to turn around and pretend that it was all about the promises that I made, and a promise made is a promise kept, the reality is that he was playing for a spot in the history books. People knew it because, as our friend Stephen Conroy quite correctly points out, was Australia racist when it was for it 60%, or is it now racist because they voted against it 60%? When it was just the vibe, people were into it. Once they worked out the detail, well, of course, they turned around and they voted against it. Shame on these people, truly shame on them. And this government, which still had a surplus, an extra surplus of $20 billion, it found $450 million down the back of the couch for the referendum. It continued to spend the money when they knew that it was going to fail. Yet, that long list, put it up on the screen again, from just one budget is the money that could have all been doubled, 10 times, 5 times, 20 times to get better results. But alas, the arrogance of Albo. But it's everyone else's fault. Now, another example of how government should be spending their money better than $450 million on a question that for months they knew the answer to around the country is about how we take care of the next generation of Australians, the ones that will be born tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. To almost any part of the country, it is, in my view, an absolute disgrace that the government doesn't fund enough medical care for sick babies. Now, you know why I'm personally invested in this, because, of course, 11 years ago, we spent time with our little man Leo in the 36 hours of his life in the intensive care unit of a hospital. And I started to notice that much of this equipment was donated by people. Now, we're coming to Mildura on Sunday. If you would like to join us for Our Town, please do so. Send me an email, ourtown@skynews.com.au, ourtown@skynews.com.au. But we've come up with an idea, which was, I remember the Humpty Dumpty Foundation, which is a fantastic charity, and they're not about politics, all right? A fantastic charity. They are the ones who actually, each and every year, raise millions of dollars for the medical equipment that keeps our little bubbers alive. Every few months they put out a wish list of things that they would like people to be able to donate, because this stuff, it ain't cheap. all right? Some of the stuff we're talking about here is, say, in the Northern Territory alone. What do they need there? They need humidification systems. They're worth $4,500. They need patient monitoring. That's worth $23,000. They need another monitor that will cost $76,000. So we want to do something now with our town, apart from celebrating the area, and thank you so much to the good people of Harvey Norman who make that happen, but I also want to leave a lasting contribution. So before we go into an our town city, we're going to try to find one thing that its local hospital needs for those sick kids. And what we've learnt about is that Mildura Base Hospital, that has about 800 babies born there each and every year, it needs a baby incubator. A baby incubator, or a neonatal incubator as it's formally called, is a medical device for premature or ill-born babies, or ill newborn babies. It controls temperature, humidity, oxygen levels, it safeguards against infections, it monitors for their vital signs, it minimises noise and light, it allows all of that protection while people are taking care of them. And I want to give one to Mildura on Sunday. But I need your help. So if you can, could you please go to this website right now, which is humpty.org.au/regional-fundraiser, humpty.org.au/regional-fundraiser, or it's on our socials right now, or write this telephone number down, because the good people of Humpty are up tonight and they're ready to take your call. 1300 Humpty, which is 1300 486 789. 1300 486 789. Now, I get it about cost of living. I get it about how times are tough, but I also know that there are some people watching who, like me, have had the experience, but also there are people who are looking for a cause to give something to. And since I announced this at the very last part of last night's show, again, I can always bet on you guys. We started with $0. Well, I'm amazed to say that right now we're at about $15,000, and that's just off one mention on television and a post on our social medias. We need it to get to 40,000, and I'm going to keep mentioning it every single night until we get to the 40, because I want to be able to go to Mildura and say, from the people who watch this show, here's something that will keep the next generation of little sick kids when they're born in Mildura alive. We'll do it every month when it comes to our town. Now, Humpty Dumpty, of course, is not connected with my politics, not connected with my blowing up on television, but this is something we can all do to help these little bubbers. Let's do it for Mildura, okay? 1300 Humpty, which is 1300 486 789, or the website humpty.org.au. Now, speaking of cost of living as well, can I call out some BS that was around today again from the government? Now, apparently the briefing that went out to the journalists after the many, many months of distraction here when it comes to The Voice, the priority of $450 million for that, for no outcome, an outcome that they knew was going to take place. Well, now they're going to reprioritise cost of living, despite the fact, of course, it's all been getting worse every week since this bloke's been the Prime Minister, every day since this bloke's been the Treasurer. Oh, but now we are supposed to all be tricked because they're going to start magically talking about it a lot. In fact, today, this is how many times they said cost of living in Parliament. See, they get it.
Cost of living.
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 But cost of living's been hurting every single day since they came to power. It's been getting worse. And without doubt, as we have shown you many times, because we were able to talk about The Voice and this at the same time, but apparently the Prime Minister was unable to, because you see $450 million while we have to raise money for babies in Mildura, $450 million for his own vanity. Well, of course, petrol prices. That's something the government could do something about tomorrow. Because you see, the federal government currently has $20 billion more than it expected to get. It's a surplus. And by cutting petrol prices by 25 cents, it would cost them $3 billion over just 6 months. So let's say $6 billion of the 20 extra they already have, they could spend on reducing petrol prices by 25 cents for the next year. But what was the Prime Minister, who's now going to try to magically make you think that he suddenly cares about cost of living? When he was distracted by The Voice, what was his answer when asked about whether the government would cut the tax that they have on petrol?
Prime Minister, will the government consider slashing the fuel excise now that petrol is above $2 a litre?
Well, we don't make tax policy on the run.
Seriously, this is madness. It just keeps going. It keeps coming. And then what about Jim Chalmers? Of course, Jim Chalmers, remember, despite the fact that $20 billion more than they needed, $20 billion more than they needed, more than even this government could come up with a way to spend, they turn around. And this is what Grim Jim said when he thought it didn't matter that they weren't doing anything about cost of living. This is exactly what he said.
We're not currently working on a new package of cost of living relief. We're focused on rolling out billions of dollars in cost of living relief that we have already announced.
Oh yeah, and that cost of living relief, because you're going to hear that an awful lot. Today the Social Services Minister stood up and actually said who is getting all of that. It's people on welfare. The people who work their guts out and just work themselves to death to pay their taxes and shut up and vote the way that they want you to. Well, of course, today, this is what the Social Services Minister laid out of all of those massive cost of living pressures. Now, a little bit more for some people on some pensions, good, but let's not pretend that this is money that's actually going to change anyone's life.
We have lifted payment rates for single parents, renters, older Australians and those who are unemployed or studying. Of course, for older Australians now eligible for the higher rate of job seeker, they've seen an increase of $109 a fortnight. And for the 60,000 single parents who have moved from job seeker to parenting payment as a result of this government's decision to expand access, these parents are now receiving at least an additional $197 a fortnight. And of course, we've now introduced the largest increase for Commonwealth rental assistance in the last 30 years. And for those on the base rate of job seeker, this has meant an increase of $56 a fortnight.
Whoa, $56 a fortnight, thanks for helping out. While petrol keeps going up, while everything else keeps going up, while power bills keep going up. Oh, now they care about cost of living. Don't fall for this garbage. I know you won't, but stick with us. By the way, I've just got an amazing message from the great Kyle Sandilands. I don't know whether he wants me to say it on air or not, but I'm going to. He's chipping in 20 grand for the babies in Mildura. That means we're going to crack 40 tonight. Do your bit too. Thank you, Kyle. I love you, brother. I really do. Firstly, I'm glad you're watching. Secondly, thank you for being so kind. We'll put it in Otto's name if you want, mate. That is a beautiful donation from Kyle Sandilands, and congratulations to him and the team on yet another grand sweep of Radio Awards ratings, but more importantly, a decent man who's watching us and doing what he can. Thank you. 1300 Humpty, 1300 486 789. Thank you, Kyle, and everyone else who is giving and giving as we speak. I reckon we'll crack the 40, well, by the end of tonight. More in a sec. God love you. 2 mentions on television. We're at $48,000 already. We're going to give the kids of Mildura and that hospital something to take care of them. Thank you very much. We'll do this every month, so there'll be plenty of opportunities. If you want to keep giving on the website, we'll find extra things. There's plenty of things that they need. But that was the big ticket item that they needed. And again, Kyle, I love you, brother. That is unbelievable. Thank you. All right, let's get straight into it now because there's so much to debate and discuss. $450 million and so much more. Senator Matt Canavan is here. Former Senator Corey Bernardi is here. Steve Price is here. And Nicholas Rees. Welcome to the great sausage party that is Monday night on Paul Murray Live. Lads, let's go. So, I want to show one of these little talking points that they floated up today, which was, that the Prime Minister, look, he wasn't being arrogant by not changing the question. He wasn't being arrogant by spending the $450 million, despite the fact that polls told us for months it wasn't going to happen. It's because he's just a good guy who followed through on a promise. I love this talking point. Roll this one.
I promised our government would seek to answer the generous and gracious call of those 440 powerful words. Through a voice, we have kept that promise. I promised that our government would seek to implement the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Matt, Stephen, Corey, I want to hear from you, but I think we want to hear from Nicholas as well right off the top here. So, Nicholas, apart from the idea going down, what about the spin now? What about the spin? Firstly, regardless of how white people voted, I thought this was an interesting one in Parliament today, despite the fact that ethnically diverse electorates, those hardcore Labor ones, that'll vote for them again at the next election, were some of the hardest ones that went no, let alone the Northern Territory, let alone. What exactly is this talking point, and do you think they can do slightly better than, look, I know we spent $450 million, I know we upset an awful lot of people, but he just was following through on a promise, you know, like $275 lower power prices.
Well, Paul, we and the panel can debate this in and out, but in a democracy, I'm just getting a bit of feedback on my earpiece, I should say, but in a democracy, we want our politicians to say what they're going to do and then do what they say. And that's what Albanese did. He left nobody under any illusions that a vote for him was a vote for a referendum to give Indigenous people recognition and the voice in the Constitution. And so he went ahead and did it. Now, the vote was no. That's obviously been a big setback for Albanese and the government, but and we can debate that, but I do not think you can criticise the fact that he took it to the people. I think it shows that he's a courageous politician.
No,
he's a person
come on,
of his
the talking point is
and
he's
I
a
think
conviction
fundamentally
politician.
he's a very decent person as well.
The talking point is he's a conviction politician. Matt Canavan, I love this. I love this one now, right? $450 million. I literally listed stuff that they could have doubled, trebled or 10 times in their own federal budget that would have got a better result than what they knew was coming in the polls before they set the date, before they locked in the question, which was no, which meant they could have pulled back and they could have put the 450 somewhere else. I don't know, but he's following through on his promise.
Well, I don't think Anthony Albanese intended to lose. What seems to be coming out from the inside story today, and I'm sure in coming days, is that pride comes before a fall. And the Prime Minister became enamoured with himself over the past year. He seemed to think his election victory last year meant that he could, single-handedly almost, deliver this result. And you can tell from the frustrations in the Yes campaign that they were banging their heads up against the wall with the Prime Minister. He wouldn't listen to anybody, and he crazily brave stuck on this course. I'm sure he didn't want to lose, and you could tell on Saturday night, I think he had quite a shock that he lost by such a margin. So it's now a test for him. It's a test for him. Can he wake up to himself and actually get back in touch with the Australian people? I mean, his election victory last year, it was the lowest Labor vote since 1910. It was no great mandate for Anthony Albanese or the Labor government. They've spent the last year acting like they did have a big mandate, and I think the outcome of that was reflected on Saturday night. Now, you know, they've only got half a term basically left to reconnect with the Australian people. They're certainly very disconnected at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, again, same question here, Steve, where, look, we know what the result was. Every poll, I mean, even when the essential poll was forced to start actually acknowledging that the yes, no and the hard no and all the rest of it, they tried a million ways to find a way to tell us that momentum was still with yes. It was very obvious where this was going, yet he pushed on. He could have split the question, he could have pulled up, and he could have said, look, I'm stopping now and I'm moving the 450 to double everything that we just did in the federal budget. He could have done that, but he didn't, because you know what he was playing for, and so do I, a place in history.
Yeah, you go to the heart of it, because, I mean, when we look back on this referendum, as we do with all referendums historically, what we're going to find is the hubris of the Prime Minister on the night when he won the election and said he would introduce the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full has divided the country. Now, what sort of Prime Minister wants on his CV the fact that he ran a referendum, that he believed that he could win? And if he thought he could win on Saturday night still, then he's sillier than what I think he is. But he's divided the country. He turned it into a bitter argument. I mean, luckily for me, I missed 4 weeks of it because I was out of the country. But it just divided Australia. It turned us into a bitter argument that never needed to be had. And, you know, Matt Canavan knows better than anyone else that, you know, places like Queensland, the result in Queensland was extraordinary. The result in South Australia, you remember when Noel Pearson and Anthony Albanese went to South Australia and said, well, South Australia is where we can win this. Well, South Australians are not stupid. They voted 60-40 like the rest of the country and said they didn't want a bar of it. I mean, this comes back to that argument, Paul, that you've made in the weeks before I went away, that Australians don't want to be lectured to by the elites. And who the hell in the Yes campaign felt that it was a good idea to get the 4 big banks on side to start telling people to vote yes? These are the same banks that are crushing people with interest rate payments on their mortgages that they can't afford to make.
Yeah, by the way, can I just make this, just while we're in the middle of this conversation, you just mentioned Qantas. Could somebody please explain to me how this business that's already in its PR world of pain, that it made a $2 billion profit when it's picking people up out of Israel, is dropping them off in London or in Dubai and not actually flying them all the way home? For free, all right? Like, well, just get to the nearest port, stop, see you later, and buy a ticket for the rest of the way home. Simple PR advice for Qantas, which is fill the plane and come back to Australia. All right, and there's many people who want it, and if God forbid there's a way people can find their way out of Gaza, that'd be great too. Let's just keep those flights coming for free for Australians. But of course, no, we're the national carrier who will take you somewhere else and then force you to buy a ticket to actually get back to Australia. Fair dinkum. Anyway, Corey, multiple question here, but here we go. Albo's yes bubble, it was popped hard. You saw him fight and bitch and moan and try to find a different, multiple ways out of it, passive-aggressive call-outs of the media that he doesn't like. We know that they'll punish those media outlets by going after the misinformation bill. But also, I can't go past what he said today. Well, I'm committed to the what I am committed to post the referendum is respecting what Indigenous people have said, and what they have said is that they're undertaking a week, which is reasonable, for them to deal with for what many people, regardless of what white people voted in this referendum, blah, 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 blah. Now, how long before that official transcript will get changed to while people or what people voted? We all heard it. That's the transcript. How long before that gets changed?
Now, I suspect it's been changed as we speak, Paul. There's a huge problem here, and for a very long time, the Australian people have been made to feel ashamed if they're not, part of some minority group, if they're not fully signed up to pagan rituals or ancient traditions. I mean, rather than some of the more modern traditions that have made this country. And Matt Canavan's absolutely right. The Prime Minister would not have gone down this path if he didn't think he was going to win. And so I think he goes down as the John Hewson of the Labor Party. He's lost the unlosable election. He's lost it in a manner which is almost unfathomable to the left, who thought they had this moral virtue there. And part of the blame has to go with his choice of Linda Burney, who is clearly an incompetent minister. She has no capacity to even sell her brief that she was tasked with one thing, and she couldn't answer a single question, nor could the PM. These people are hopeless. I think they're incredibly lazy. They're doing a huge disservice to Australia. And now they've got the temerity, or the Prime Minister does, to suggest white people are the problem here. Wow. Well, it's not. We're not the problem, let me tell you. The problem is the politicians who refuse to acknowledge the true disadvantage and the Aboriginal industry that has been taking advantage of the billions that flows their way. The first one to the trough gets all the spoils, and there's very little that flows on to those who truly need it.
Well,
that
of course,
needs to change.
Now,
Paul.
as we all know, when you're a Labor person, you get a redo, a re-speak, I didn't and you watch. You saw the grab. I showed you the transcript, all right? Wait and watch where this goes in the next little while. Whereas, of course, we'll be accused to be the ones, as opposed to what he actually said and did. Nicholas, not a giant surprise that it ended up 60-40 the other way. Let's have a look at some of the campaigning tactics of the yes side.
What that asinine slogan is saying is if you're a dinosaur, a dickhead, who can't be bothered reading, then vote no.
Every time the no case raises one of their arguments, if you start pulling it apart, you get down to base racism. I'm sorry to say it, but that's where it lands. Or just sheer stupidity.
Drumming up outrage, trying to start a culture war.
It is importing Trump-style politics to Australia.
Yes or no. It's that simple. I wrote yes. My daughter was there. She got it. She's 9. She said, I can't believe anyone would vote no to this.
The no campaign strategy, a deliberate strategy of promoting fear over fact.
This is a sign of just how low the no campaign is willing to go. And I call on Peter Dutton today to condemn this. If he doesn't, then he is complicit in this lie.
Now, Nicholas, you've been on the inside of elections and you know how this works, right? Obviously, you need to rev up some people by going to events of people who already agree with you because you need them to go and hit the streets for you, right? However, most of those comments were made from events like that, or when the Prime Minister would try to bash away at the no campaign, he didn't actually put 2 and 2 together that the majority of Australia was agreeing with the no campaign. So as clever as he thought the distinction might be, it ended up as a repetitive insult that people heard.
Look, I have been involved in a lot of campaigns. I've won some, I've lost some. I can tell you, 2020 hindsight is a wonderful thing. why did the, Yes campaign lose? Well, there were a couple of campaigning factors, and I think some were more significant than the ones you've just gone through there. The first one was that the Yes campaign just ran dead for months and months and months, from January all the way through to August, September. They didn't even have their sneakers on, and the No campaign was out there campaigning strongly, notwithstanding the fact that many of them were saying, there's more important issues than this. They kept running the No arguments very, very strongly. And so by the time the Yes campaign sort of got up and going, most people had made up their minds. And, I think it was Albert Einstein who said that it's easier to split the atom than change someone's mind once it's made up. So I think the Yes campaign just left their run too late. I think the other factor was, and I don't think this has been talked about enough, the use of the term voice. I actually think that was quite confusing for people. It's like, well, what is a voice? It's actually something pretty simple and boring. It's an advisory committee to the government that's non-binding. If they just called it what it actually was, a really boring new advisory committee made up of Aboriginal people to help with making Aboriginal policy, might have done a lot better than this thing, the voice, which, then the lack of understanding about that then allowed the opponents of the voice to jump in and scare the bejesus out of people about it. But the biggest factor, of course, hang on, just let me finish. The biggest factor of all was, Peter Dutton said no. And as we know, we've now only had 8 out of 45 referendums ever succeed.
That you were involved with and you supported, you kept saying we're trying to scare people. We weren't trying to scare people. We're trying to tell people what was actually happening. Nick.
Correct.
There was woeful misinformation being peddled.
Like what?
Well, I'll tell you.
What?
Okay, so what about the one that where Jacinta Price kept saying Aboriginal people weren't supporting this? Now, we know today it's a provable fact.
Well, the Yes campaign kept saying 80% voted.
In fact, in many remote communities, the support level was 92%.
Okay, all right. So only Palm Island should have decided what's in the Australian Constitution. All right, quick break. Back with more. Pricey, you'll be first cab off the rank, I promise. Next, I've got to get my left and right there opposite and telly. Quick break. Back with more. Again, your generosity, unbelievable, right? We wanted to get to 40. We're now at about 64 right now. So thank you very much to everyone who has given. Again, hold your fire. We'll come back at you again in another month. But Mildura is getting something special from the people who watch Paul Murray live. Thanks. Here with Matt Canavan, Nicholas Rees, also here with Corey Bernardi and Steve Price. Now, there's lots of other topics, but obviously we're just going to keep going with the voice here because everyone's got plenty more to say. We could fill an hour with each and every one of you here. That's the way it is. Let's talk about where the people behind the Yes movement are probably going to end up. Good and reasonable people like Chris Kenny are not going to be part of who I'm talking about here. And again, I appreciate the honesty and I love the place that we have here where you can argue all sides of it and we're passionate about it and we all accept the result. I really do appreciate that. But let's talk about the black sovereign movement because, Pricey, the reality is and one of the reasons this has failed is because the sort of Goldilocks approach of just right wasn't enough because there are people who want to only have the day one conversation and there are people who want to have the what's going to happen tomorrow conversation. Now, the day one conversation is the Lydia Thorpes of this world, the black sovereign movement. Do you think that is where energy is going to start to go? Now, I don't know what fruit that bears, but I think that is going to become the place rather than the just right sort of movement of government compromises that were being offered.
Yeah, of course it's going to end up there. I mean, we've seen South Australian debate today, and Corey will know more about this than me, but Peter Malinauskas is going ahead with his truth-telling commission. I'm in Victoria with Nicholas and, of course, Daniel Andrews, who, thank God, is no longer with us. He'd pushed this state down the road toward treaty already. You've got a Labor Premier in New South Wales. You've got a Labor government in Queensland. You've got a Labor government in WA. I mean, all of these state governments are going to go down this track, and they would have seen the result on Saturday night as, oh, well, we can now take over this process and we can use it to our electoral advantage. They might be thinking now whether it is an electoral advantage, but you're going to see each of these states push down the road of treaty, recompense and truth-telling. That's where we're headed.
Do you think that, Matt, that there's going to be greater caution here, or do you think the reality is that the lesson learnt here is don't ask the people, just go around them?
Look, I'm more of an optimist than Steve. I think that black sovereign movement, while it will be there, will be a serious minority among the Australian people and among Indigenous people. I just, we're a country that's so mixed now. And that's what ultimately won the argument here. I think that first ad the No campaign put out was a killer. That Jacinta Price herself is a mixed race. She's married a Scottish bloke. We can't split ourselves up into different groups. It just can't. We're all Australians now. We're all intermingled. And whatever our history or past has been, our future is together. And I'm confident that that will be the vast majority of Australians' desire for the future, including Indigenous Australians. Look, in terms of state governments, some radical state governments will do what Steve is doing, but I think it will continue to prove to be very, very unpopular with people, as the WA government's laws, which were somewhat disconnected to the voice, but showed just the last few months they had to back down on those. I may be hoping against hope, but there is the potential in the future for state governments to focus on giving Indigenous communities, Indigenous people more economic rights to develop their own land, to start their own businesses. That is the future. Give them an economic stake in this country, give them a sustainable way of knowing how to fish rather than just giving fish. That's the solution. Maybe that is a bit too optimistic to think, but I don't think we're going to divide as a country. This result showed how united we are as Australians. I'm very confident about our nation's future.
All right, quick one here. Corey, you know how this thing goes into the future. Do you expect things to become more radical in the conversation, or they just find a way to go around the people?
The answer to that is both. You're going to have these emboldened radical people like Lydia Thorpe and her crew. I reckon they're going to just continue to get feral, the same people who've been doing the tent embassy gig for however many decades. You're going to have state governments who go, well, we don't want to put ourselves on the chopping block here, so what can we do to work around it? As you said, Malinowski's got it through the parliament here in South Australia. Now they're going to enrich a whole bunch of people, and like the lords of the land, and put them on $150,000 salaries or something like that to tell the government what to do. But I think the great mainstream of Australia is going to say, no, we've had enough of this. There's enough white guilt in this country. There's enough money that's flowing into these things. Where is the cash going? And I think that's one of the most important things that Peter Dutton and Jacinta Price have said, is they need to audit where the billions have been going, because the money is not the problem. The problem is it's not getting to where it's necessary. So who is clipping the ticket? Who is living high on the hog? I can come up with as many other phrases as you like, but the cash is disappearing from where it should be.
I've got 30 seconds. Nicholas, how concerned do you think the Labor Party should be about the growing future of Jacinta Price and her effectiveness to talk to normal people?
Well, look, I think it's always easier to argue for the no case in a referendum, because when you're arguing for yes, you've got to make the case for change, and the no case is simple. You just say, why risk the good situation we've got now for the unknown, which might cause harm? So I do think Jacinta Price has proven herself to be a very good campaigner, but I think she had an easy road to hoe on this one, and we'll see how she goes going forward. You know, as I said before, I think she was peddling information which has now been proven to be untrue. Fact is, the vast majority of Aboriginal Australians voted for the voice, so she's going to have to face up to her own community on that score.
You take solace in that, but the scoreboard is what it is fairly clearly for a lot of different reasons. But I get it. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, everyone. Do appreciate it. Talk to you soon. All right, quick break. Back with more. Lots still to go, but about 4 minutes before the late debate here on Paul Murray Live. Thank you again. Your generosity, it just knocks me over every time. Thank you. Welcome to the world, Lillian. You're going to be a wonderful sister. Don't forget to join us for Our Town if you would like to. It is ourtown@skynews.com.au. Mildura Sunday. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. More in a sec.